Hi there and welcome.
You're listening to Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm.
My name is Avantika, and I'm a researcher exploring animal consciousness, environmental sustainability, and planetary health. I want to help bring animal perspectives to the table and transform our relationship with the natural world.
And I'm Barbara. I'm an animal communicator and retired veterinarian. My true passion is exploring the hearts and souls of animals and helping people come to a much deeper understanding of who the animals truly are at their core.
This podcast is for anyone who loves animals and nature and has an interest in their own personal and spiritual development. We'll bring you powerful conversations with fascinating people about animal and nature sentience, consciousness, and communication.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of love, respect, understanding, and care for the fellow beings who share our beautiful Mother Earth with us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm. If you've ever wondered what it's like to actually communicate with an animal, or if you're curious about how animal communicators actually receive information from them, and you want to know how an animal communicator can help with decision-making and with the dynamics in your family between humans and the animals, then you're in the right place, because we're going to talk today about all of those things with our guest, Liz Murdoch. Liz, as a young girl, at the age of 5, actually, realized that she could understand what a dog was thinking. Can you imagine what that must be like for a 5-year-old? Well, she went on to win awards as a child and as an adult in dog training. In fact, she got her first award for dog training at the age of 8. Liz is passionate about helping families enhance their relationships with animals and improve their communication skills so that families with their companion animals can live in greater harmony. She's helped professionals who work with animals, animal rescue organizations, foster organizations. She's done work in animal-assisted therapy. She's done so much, and we're so excited to have her here today to share with us a little bit about her life experiences and all that she's learned as she's been communicating with the animals. So welcome, Liz. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Avantika and Barbara. I'm really glad to be here.
We're so happy to have you with us. So thank you for joining us. So Liz, can you just briefly tell us how you got started as an animal communicator?
So Avantika was right when she said I first understood a dog in kindergarten, but I wasn't really asked to communicate with a dog until I was an adult and I was working with a rescue. And they asked me if I would mind going to meet a dog that they were thinking about bringing into their group to place. And they just needed someone to go meet the dog. And could I do that? And that was just based on what they knew about me and my work with them. But I went out and I did. And I went out and got in my car and I wrote what the dog had told me, thinking nothing of it. But when I gave it to them, they were like, wow, this is great. Can you do another one? So I started doing them regularly with the rescue. And so that was probably, 15 years ago, it is at least 15 years ago or so. And from that's what got it started.
So did you right away call yourself a professional animal communicator after that, or did it take some time?
No. So I did a lot of dogs with the rescue. And I didn't even think anything I didn't know what an animal communicator was. I just talked to dogs. And when I moved from Northern California to Southern California, and I missed it. I grieved it. And people would laugh. I'd say, I miss working with the dogs. And they go, but you have 3 dogs. I was living with 3 dogs. And yet I had this need within me that I had to go talk to dogs, other dogs. And it was the rescue part of the work. And I tried to replicate it, and people didn't know me. I just moved here. And so, they were like, well, we'd like to get to know you. Why don't you volunteer at our table or, more basic rescue work, which I understood, but I'd done so much that I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to talk to the dogs. So I was actually, and it's funny how things work. And I think there's a lot of that in animal communication, a stepping stone that you just happen to take leads you there. So my mother passed away, and in my grief journey, I ended up at a church that I found on Facebook. It was an ad for a grief talk. And I went to the grief talk, and after the service and this talk, there was a table in the courtyard on a professional animal communicator offering a workshop. And I was like, I'm going to do that. Here's my money. I couldn't give it to her fast enough. It was just an intro, 3 hours. And I knew I needed to do it. And that's what got me started with training. And in the practice, so, people can take classes. I took class, then it became training. Then it was like the practice. And it became clear to me that I could do it as a business because I got so many referrals. So it was a process for sure.
That's very cool. I listened to what we'll have later is your sessions with Avantika and her animals. It was so fascinating. And I noticed just how specific and detailed you are in the information you get. I was really impressed. Okay. And you work also as a medical intuitive, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, how do you get your information? Do you see things? Do you feel things in your body? How do these messages actually come to you?
So the messages come to me in a variety of ways. I get it in so many ways. So I will feel it. Yesterday, I was working with a horse client, and I started feeling so nauseous, and I was like, oh, I feel it here. And I described where in my body it was. But then I had a knowing that I wasn't going to throw up and that it wasn't digestive related. I was like, ooh, I feel like it's from the vagus nerve. I feel like it's stemming from the neck is causing it. Now, that's only because I have had head injuries and vagus nerve. I know about it. And so, again, I give the disclaimer, a vet or whoever works with you might look into that area, or if they suggest it, be open to that. So I found that, especially with the medical stuff, I have to be so specific to describe it because I'm not trained as a veterinarian. And so I want to get the description that's not a diagnosis, but where exactly I'm feeling it. And that if it's a pain that's radiating, I typically feel it or I can see it. I will see like, oh, it feels like confetti, like the nerves are jumbly like the confetti. Or I might hear it like, oh, there's a cracking sound, or I hear the gurgling in the dog's belly. So I get all the senses except smell is one that I don't get as frequently or as fast as the knowings, the feelings, the sounds. I'll see the words. The smell is the one that I don't have as strong. But dogs will tell me. I had another dog yesterday who I had a knowing, and he was showing me that how much he loves to smell, but I didn't smell anything. And I knew it was food, and I could see the boxes that this woman brings home in her hands.
It's incredible. I mean, really, that's so specific. And I think it's probably pretty rare to have that kind of gift. So it's pretty amazing.
Well, I also worked on it. So I have a handful of private animal communicator students that I'm working with, and they will say, the dog the dog doesn't like car rides. And I'm like, okay, now that's fine. You may be incredibly accurate, but if someone's paying you and they really want to help their dog with another issue, any part that's skeptical may be like, well, sure, all dogs do, or most dogs do. So I will take them. I say, whatever word or sentence you get, I want you to stretch that. I want you to try and go back to the dog and say, what is it that you like about the car rides? Because it can vary so much. So as they do that, and that's where the muscle and the practice and the fine tuning of pulling it apart and working with someone who can like have you be accountable can be stretched to your dog likes car rides because, oh, you just moved the dog from the floor to the back seat and he feels so much safer. He's secure. Or because the windows rolled down, or he loves the new place you're going. Dogs will answer all that, but it's up to the people, the animal communicator, to ask more questions until it's specific enough that it's not just a puzzle, it's like the puzzle piece that's the cardboard side, but you're turning it over and we can actually use it for some good.
Wow.
That's the goal.
That's incredible. So you were talking about real specific symptoms in the body, for instance.
Yes.
Do you actually get validation for that somehow? How do you get validation?
Okay. So typically, because they will go to a vet, I had a woman call me. She goes, I've worked with all these animal communicators and, I'm open. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're not. I'm like, okay. I said, that can be with anything. I said, I'm happy to keep the appointment. And, if you're not satisfied, I'll give you your money back. So she said, fine. So we did the session and she had called me on a behavior issue. And I always end my sessions with the dogs being able to talk about whatever. And so we're talking, and I'm looking at the dog, and the dog is sitting here making no sign of the head, had been looking at me the whole time. So it was not body language. And I go, oh, his left ear is sore. I said, I work on pain versus discomfort. I'm very cautious with words and try and be, as you say, descriptive. I said, I feel this fiery pain deep in the ear. I really want you to go to the vet. I know it's another expense, which comes up with people, and why I think it's important to be specific, because they've already hired me and now they're going to go to the vet. And so I'm like, I really think you should take your dog to the vet. Something's not right. She's like, okay, well, okay. I said, really, I don't think you'll regret it. She goes to the vet. The vet says your dog has a very bad ear infection, same ear. They treated, the dog is fine. And it alleviated some of the behavior issues that we were talking about because the dog was uncomfortable. I will get, everybody verifies it. I've had people with meds and I say, ooh, one of the meds feels metallic-y. And I said, call your vet. Often, just like people, meds can be adjusted. I don't know what med it is. I see that you have a variety of things that you give your dog. Call your vet and say, you think something might need to be adjusted. You can say you talked to an animal communicator. It felt metallic-y and nauseous. You're seeing your dog is lethargic. I said, just double check the meds with your vet. Calls the vet. The vet says, oh yeah, you can stop X. She takes it off. The dog is fine. And so it's pretty verifiable. I have never had anybody who it wasn't.
That's so cool. Very cool.
And I think that, if someone wants to try it, wait on the meds. I mean, I work with people who it's like, should I retire my show dog? Should I retire my, there's a big stake questions. Is it time to euthanize my dog? And that's why working up to those kinds of clients or situations, it's so good to practice being super specific. And in the beginning, I remember I was with a dog, and it was at the end of the session, it was like, oh, one more thing. I'm concerned about the umbrella. And this is in the summer. And I was like, oh gosh. And, the ego is a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if I want to say this. I don't want to be wrong. We had a good session, but I say it because, the gold is in those weird things. So I say, oh, the dog's concerned about this umbrella. I could see the window, and outside the window. Again, it's summertime in a place that gets hardly any rain. So she says, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. We live in a townhouse. Their umbrella keeps flipping over. They share a fence in between the two patios, and it keeps flipping over. And the dog's concerned about the umbrella hitting the other dog that is slow moving.
Wow. That's amazing.
So specifics are so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, Liz, that the level of specificity is really interesting and probably gives people, a lot to work with as well, because you're giving them things that are so detailed. And speaking of your experience working with vets, you've talked a little bit about how the role of an animal communicator can be so helpful or so important when working with other professionals like vets or like dog trainers. So can you speak a little bit more about what your experience has been like working with those professionals, either directly or indirectly?
Sure. So working with vets and working with dog trainers, I find is still very different. The vets I find are more open to it. And
Oh, really? Okay.
definitely. Some vets, they don't want to know what the animal communicator has said just because they want to do their job and find out what it is, which I understand. It's just like when I'm working on a lost dog, I like to just work on the dog. I don't need to hear what all the other people are saying. That's just part of the experience. But some vets are like, I mean, there's a lot of dogs that go to the vet and the vet doesn't find anything because there's a multitude of tests and the person has opted for just the blood test and not the CAT scan or whatever. And sometimes, especially like cancers, can be very, very small. I've seen like dark circles and that they're like, oh, they didn't find it. And I was like, well, there's something there. I said, I think you need to go to a specialist, keep going. And sometimes I'll say, oh, there's a woman with long brown hair who you used to go to, or there's somebody, and they'll always know who I'm talking about. And then they'll find it because sometimes it's early stage. It depends on what the vet does. And so just like people, we get a second opinion. So vets are like, when they can't find something, they're typically like appreciative of the direction because they want to help the dog. And it's often because the people chose a certain test or the vet is more experienced in one thing versus another, like nutrition. Oh my God, there's those variables. So they're open. They just see it's like, sure, like if you have a stomach ache, your eye doctor isn't necessarily going to help you with your stomach ache. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with vets. So they're open to it for the most part, I'd say. And they're also fascinated, I find. I mean, Barbara can probably talk to it. They've seen, depending on the vet, too many instances that's unexplainable.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, Liz, like, is it usually the client who will come and find you and bring you into the conversation about, diagnosis or decisions? Or do you ever get called in by a veterinarian directly?
I don't think I've been called by a veterinarian for one of their clients, but I have multiple veterinarians as clients, which I think is interesting.
Okay.
Yes. And the vets who have called me, often it's for euthanasia support and clarity on their own dog because it's such a personal, emotional thing that they want like not a sounding board.
Right.
This one vet was like, we're going to do it today, this afternoon. And I just want some support here. And I was like, your dog is saying no. And again, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm telling a vet, no, your dog is saying no. But I said, there's too much going on this afternoon. These people just booked a session. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I said, your dog is saying there's too much going on. You're going to be a mess. I know it's my time, but I often find animals are very protective of the people. So I got a letter back saying, we waited till Wednesday and it was so much better. Thank you so much. So vets will call for support. But I haven't experienced that we're at the point where vets are recommending it. Unless most people who are referred to me don't tell me who recommended them. They don't. They just want to get started.
I'm just really amazed that you say so many veterinarians are open because when I started doing this so many years ago, and I was actually a veterinarian, and I thought these are my peers, my colleagues, and they would believe what I have to say. They were so close-minded. But I also know that over these years, people in general, including veterinarians, have become a lot more open to animal communication. So, and you're so specific and you have such good information that I'm sure that's a big piece of why they're so open to what you do. But it's very exciting that that's the case.
Yeah, the newer one. So I have my little dog, Honey. She's 16. She had a growth under her tail that was affecting her going to the bathroom. I had 5 different vets, oncologists, who wanted to do immediate surgery. And I said, no, it's not cancer. I knew. And now I just looked at them and said, thank you. I'll think about it. I knew in my core it was not cancer. And I had a dog that had cancer, and I'd been through treatment, and I could just feel that she was healthier than that, but it needed to be treated. So I walked away from all these doctors all over LA. So because I can't diagnose, I just knew that she didn't have these symptoms in her body. I could see it, and it was growing. And I did all this research, and I found one study that said that some dogs with too much testosterone, female dogs, will grow this. So one day it started bleeding, and I'm like, I got to do something. So I found a surgeon who was double board certified, and because it was right where she goes to the bathroom. And I said, I need this removed, and I don't want her to be paralyzed and the side effects. So he did this. He said, I want to biopsy it. I said, no, I don't want to spend the money. I know this is already going to be expensive. I don't believe she has cancer. And he was like, he'd seen her chart, and because she'd been paralyzed, and she was cured from that too. So he's like, I'm just so curious about this dog. How about if I split it with you? I said, fine. It came back. It was totally clean. He was wide-eyed. And so I've just seen it, that we make our choices. And that's why I'm willing to help people very clearly. I do not diagnose. I say that over and over. I will describe, I will give information for people to make their decisions. It's okay to have multiple vet opinions. But for me, with my dog, she is 16 and a half. Yeah. And she is doing great. And she did not have cancer.
That's amazing.
I love this. This is so exciting. And what if veterinarians, as part of their curriculum in vet school, and vet techs and all the people that work with animals in this way, even rescuers and sanctuary and shelter people, what if they were trained at least somewhat in animal communication, so they could go a little deeper than what they see on the surface? Wouldn't that be phenomenal? Yeah.
And even the rest, I mean, the last interspecies symposium, I did a presentation on the service dogs. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with that too. And so it sort of leads me to how people use animal communication. Anyone who's listening, who's an animal communicator, I sort of push people to consider, how do you really want to use this? You know, we could grow our Instagram followings, and we can say we offer, a certification course, but consider where you can really make an impact, whether it's in your local community or however, because there's such a need for it. And it can be, Honey could have been euthanized, had this expensive surgery, which would have been taxing to our family. It can make such a difference in people's lives if we go, as animal communicators, go deeper with how we're even using it. And if we ask, like when I say, ask the dog who likes the car ride, tell me exactly why. And as animal communicators, we say, how exactly do I want to make an impact in this world? What kinds of people do I want to teach? I love my students because they are so focused, and every one of them comes and says, I know I am supposed to work with you. And that's not true for everybody out there, because obviously there's other people doing this, but I know that there's probably a few people, if they ask themselves, like the dog, tell me exactly how I want to use animal communication. That's, I think, how we're going to change the vets, or not change them, give them even stronger tools for what everyone else is doing who works with dogs.
Yeah, absolutely, Liz. And, also I think in all of this is the clients that you work with, the humans that live with their companion animals. And in a previous conversation, you've talked about empowering them, like empowering people and families to make better decisions on behalf of their dogs, for their dogs, so that they can live better lives together. So can you speak a little bit about how you see your role as an animal communicator, as someone who can help with this in terms of, family dynamics and empowering the people in the home?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So when people call me, initially they might be like, oh, my dog is scratching all the time and I can't figure it out. And the vet says she's fine and doesn't have allergies, but she's scratching. And I'm like, okay, well, let me think. And I'll tune into the dog, blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell her something about the laundry detergent that she just changed and that she keeps changing. Yeah, we just buy whatever's on sale. And I said, would you ever notice that like when you went to the vet, it was like when you're using the good one and then you switched again? And she's like, oh yeah, I never realized that. But you know what? I had a feeling it was the laundry detergent. And I'm like, okay, well, what if we can get all those things that you have a feeling about so that you trust your feelings more and you understand that those feelings are often something that's accurate. And we start building up your own confidence with your dog. And that's how, when my clients are able to do that, then they start trusting. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, like this one family that wanted, they thought it was time to euthanize this very senior dog who looked like it wasn't really moving. When in the Zoom call, that dog wanted more outside time. They live in New York City. And I was like, oh, so they are now driving the dog around New York City and they're having the best time because they were able to, I didn't say drive the dog around New York City. They figured it out what was best for them and their dog. And they said, we are having the best time that we didn't even think we were going to have this much time with our dog. Yeah. And now we're doing all these new things. I just said, your dog is not ready. Your dog still has things I want to do. The things the dog was saying, I kept seeing outside. Your dog wants outside, the smelling. It actually likes the cold air because I had lived in LA. So it loves the cold air. So when people get that information that I'm getting, and it's just a glimpse, one conversation, or, they have multiple sometimes, but when they take the information and they make it their own, like ingredients, and they're like, we had the best pasta for dinner. Thanks for the tomatoes. That's what it's like. And then they start knowing, oh, she likes car rides. Let's do this. Oh, we should stop there. That's how it changes.
That's amazing. It probably gives people, a nudge to like stop and listen also, and to like very purposefully and intentionally try to connect with their animals in a different way, and realize that we can actually, if we tune in and we really show them that we want to understand what they need and what they desire, that we can often, receive that information. And for you to be able to help empower them and show them how they can do that is pretty amazing. And I imagine most people who have companion animals get these intuitive nudges, and, they know things about their animals that they just know. So encouraging them to keep doing that and keep leaning into that is really nice. And that reminds me what you were just saying about the dog who wanted to be outside more, reminded me of the story you've told us before about, and you've told us about creating bucket lists with dogs, and the dog who wanted to have a party before they moved. I would love if you could share that story with us again.
Okay, so this is a dog.
And to talk about the bucket list thing that you like to do with dogs, which is a lot of fun.
So this dog, they thought that somebody had referred me because they thought that it was their dog's time kind of thing. And it was the same thing. It's like, well, I don't know. She sounds very busy. Like she's got things to do. And they're like, yeah, she does still sort of move, they have verified. And I'm like, well, she said she wants you to have a dinner party. And they're like, yeah, we want to have they're moving. We want to have a housewarming party. I go, well, she says she doesn't know that house. And they're like, well, we weren't sure if she was even going to make it there. I'm like, well, she doesn't know that house. She's like, why would I want to have a dinner party in a house that I don't know? She wants to have it in your current house. And they're like, well, we've got a lot going on. We're packing. And I'm like, she needs you to have a dinner party, but she says only with the dog people. And so, and I could see this, I could feel it. I go, you have candles at your house. And they're like, yeah. They were laughing. And she's like, you can make it a potluck. I like those anyway. She loves, I see the sniffing, the whole thing. So we finished this, we did this session, and there are other dogs in that family. So we talked about the other dogs, and then I closed my book and off they go. And so they texted me a couple weeks later and they said, hey, Liz, we just wanted to let you know we had the dinner party. And I was like, oh, I want to read this. And so they had the dinner party, and they said that 15 minutes before the guests arrived, she sat by the front door expectantly, like she knew, because however they do things. And they said that she had the best time, that she went around to each person and spent time. The other dog didn't participate. And they were so happy they had their dinner party. And then, so this is the sequel to that. So then they were thinking they wanted to get another dog, which is actually common when people have dogs and they're seniors and they think, well, should I get another one now? So they texted me, they were going to get this large dog, and could I help them decide whether it was right? And I wrote back and I said, I'm happy to chat, but I think ask the dog. And I said her name, the one who wanted the dinner party. I said, ask her what she thinks. So they texted me back and said, we're not getting the dog. We talked to her. It's not right for us. I'm like, okay. So anyway, they ended up getting a different dog, and that's how it just sort of domino effect. They ended up getting another dog, and it's because their confidence in their own personal knowing is growing, and their relationship on knowing what their dogs want is growing. And they got a big dog instead of the big dog. They got this little dog. We had a session with the little dog, and they totally are convinced that this little dog has ties to a previous dog that had passed away. So it's all just like, once you open up, it's like a blossoming rose, because you stop to look at it instead of like, oh, look at that pretty green bush over there.
Yeah. And that probably encourages people to see animals in a different way too. Like, I feel bad, charging into a situation thinking I know everything and I know what's best for my animals. So really stopping to think about what they would like and what they would prefer, I think is so important. So they can be part of the decision making, and we're not
or offer another perspective that
Right.
helps, that they don't make the decision. Like the dogs they had didn't really have much input about, and I've had this, the dogs that give input, like, do you want another dog? This one woman whose dog was dying, she's like, should I get another puppy now? Should I wait? I'm like, oh. So I said, well, let's ask the dog. So the senior dog says, well, you can ask me, but you haven't answered the question if you want a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And she burst into tears and she's like, no, I haven't. And she's like, I don't want another dog right now. I don't want a puppy. I'm like, okay, will you revisit this? Well, she changed her mind and they got a dog and they were all happy. But just how the animals shift the questions back to very personal things that they know about the person is also, I find, amazing.
We talked a little bit earlier about end of life decision making and euthanasias. And I'm wondering, as an animal communicator, it sounds like a lot of what you do is you help people work through their emotions, a variety of emotions that can come up when you live and share your life with an animal, like the guilt that can be associated with the death of an animal. How do you see your role in this, and how can you provide support in these types of situations?
So I work with a lot of people, especially after Teddy died, my dog, in March, with euthanasia, and that wanting that knowing, isn't my dog's time? What can I do to keep my dog comfortable? Those are the two biggest things typically that I ask dogs, those questions. What do you want your person to know about this time? And letting people know that it's okay to trust their knowing. I called a in-home euthanasia company, and the first person I talked to, we were not a match. And I because of my work, I was comfortable enough to say, oh, I don't think you're the one for us, but thank you. And giving people in such an emotional time that strength to say, I still have a choice on what is right for me and my dog, and getting the support and getting to their knowing this. If it doesn't feel right, then there's another choice. There's always another vet. There's another vet tech. There's a bed you can move. It's okay to say, I want to do this today, if that's right for you. People don't want to do certain procedures. They'll say, my dog wouldn't like this surgery. I always thought I should do everything, but I don't think he'd like that. People have such relief. So it's supporting them and empowering them to make the choice that's right for them and their dog. And people typically say, by working with an animal communicator, or, they'll say with me at least, it feels different this time. And I'm still sad, but they'll take a breath. It just feels different. Thank you. Giving them that relief in a very difficult, painful time.
Yeah. There was an example you shared. There was a story you shared with us previously where there was a woman who was feeling bad about when the euthanasia happened and if she should have waited. And then when you were able to connect in and reassure her that she did what was right for both of them. Yeah.
And I think it's important, though, that because I've seen people said, do I do grief support? I don't know. There may be a few, but animal communicators, for the most part, like I've taken death and dying classes, and it's not a training for pet loss support, but it's a training in how we can deal with the pet's perspective and what the pet wants to share about death and dying in that time period, that can support like that particular woman whose dog, who was then questioning, should I have done it sooner? And I had tuned back into the dog who's now passed away on the other side. And I'm still communicating with this dog and getting messages in a new way. And that dog literally said, like, well, should we have done it this time? Should we have done it, this weekend when we had family visiting? Was that the right setting? And she's like, no. And the dog is giving her examples of, well, when should we have done it then and then? And she's like, no. So she was able to come to this own decision of, I did it at the right time. And then she can go back to her therapist and her grief counseling group to process grief, because grief, when a dog dies or a pet, from the work I've done, co-counseling, where somebody else is the grief counselor and I'm talking about the pet's messages, we find that the dog has died and the person, it's triggering another death. And so that's why a trained grief counselor is so important, and not me as an animal communicator, because I'm not trained when someone's dog has died and it's triggering memories of another loss in their life. That requires a different kind of support. And I think that it's important to separate the two, because people grieving don't always need an animal communicator to say what their dog is saying. They need a grief counselor to help them with the loss of their dog, their father or something, but it all gets muddled. So I'm sensitive to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that death and dying is one of the biggest issues that, at least in my experience, that animal communicators can help with, because it's such a difficult time for people. And to reassure them that everything's okay and that the dog is fine, and that my experience is that the animals accept death far more than most humans. They're not as afraid of it. They are more at peace with it. And a lot of people seem to go through guilt that they waited too long or they didn't wait long enough. And so I think it's such a valuable service that you do and others do.
Yeah. Do you find too that, and I know I've talked with some grief counselors, that sometimes people, even when my dog passed away in March and it's fresh, guilt is somehow easier to hold on to than grief, because we can beat ourselves up and we can overanalyze. Oh, I should have done it yesterday. I should have done this. And it can distract us from just sitting with that pain and loss. Like I miss my dog. So grief at least guilt gives us something to do.
But don't you also think that in our culture, death and dying is not something, it's changing, but traditionally it hasn't been something that we've talked about. And certainly a lot of people think it's just a dog. Why would you go through this huge grief process? And so I think in a lot of cases, we're not given permission by others or by ourselves to fully grieve. And it's necessary to grieve.
Definitely. I think the pandemic changed that because we became even more attached to our dogs. We were isolated with them, or our pets, any animal. And so this loss is even more profound because, I was with Teddy all the time for 2 years.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So on another subject, Liz, I'm curious about how dog training, because you trained dogs for a long time, how does that contribute to your work as an animal communicator?
So dog training is an interesting part of working with dogs and animal communication, because there's so many ways people train or interact or teach their house rules. I call it house rules for their dogs. And so even if somebody hasn't been to an official dog training class, they still have habits that they've created that it's not up to me to tell them what time to feed their dog, to separate their dogs when they eat, to solve reactivity. And some of them don't want to take that time commitment or pay an extra price. So that's where I think it requires diplomacy. When I get a message from a dog about this one dog, they were like, oh, my dog is awful to walk. And I got this feeling, I could see it and I could feel the leash, and I could just feel the person and the dog moving. And the dog was like, well, it would be nice if you taught me how to walk on a leash. Because the dog had never been on a leash before, and it was living in this place. And and harnesses, that whole thing. Oh gosh, dogs have a lot of opinion about leashes and harnesses and collars. And that's not something I can comment on at all. And so I will have to say, oh, well, your dog wants help walking on a leash, or your dog wants more longer walks. One woman, I said, your dog wants 2 walks a day. And she's like, well, that's not going to happen. People, they're not stuffed animals. So when it comes to dog training, a lot of dogs need fine tuning. And so I say diplomacy in how to get them to work together. Families, the dog's peeing in the house. And I'll say, oh, well, your dog says I don't do it all the time. I'll give them the specifics. And the issue is that the family is assuming someone else is letting the dog out. They have no idea that it's been 6 hours and this puppy hasn't been given out. So dog training helps with all those kinds of things, but getting people to think that, oh, maybe you need to teach your manners or something. They sometimes people are a little resistant.
Yeah, I worked as a dog trainer many years ago, and I got so frustrated because I could handle the dog fine, but the people, that was another issue. They just either they didn't understand or they didn't want to, and they certainly weren't very consistent often. And it can be quite frustrating.
You're right. It can be frustrating. And that's why it's so good to be specific in the early parts of a session, because when they're like, oh my gosh, she knows that we just got the dog a new bed and it likes that it's cushy. And when I say about favorite things or whatever specific, when I get to those trickier things that require a modification on the person's behavior, then they're more likely to take it seriously because she was accurate about these 5 things. So why is she's not suddenly inaccurate that my dog wants to learn how to walk on a leash better?
Do you find people ever ask you, oh, can you just tell the dog to stop doing this? Or can you tell them to start doing this, and expect that you can just ask them and they'll just do it, not taking into account that the animals have their free will as well. And they have, some of the work, like you're saying, is on our part as the humans. Like we have to put that effort in.
Most people who come to me at this point know that I'm not going to tell the dog because I'm such a supporter that the dogs want people to talk to them, and they would rather have you tell your dog. The only thing different is lost dogs. They want me to say, can you just tell her to come home? Can you help me bring her home? That I can't do. Dogs. I had a woman who was ready to give up on her cat. It'd been over a month. And I said, oh no, your cat's on an adventure. And I said, it's a he. He's going to come home. His paws are getting sore and he's tired, but he's loved this. And he came home. He did exactly what we had suggested he do. Go to somebody's open garage where someone's in the garage. He did all of that, but it was 39 days. But she would have given up. So yeah, we can't tell them. We can give them suggestions on what to do, the animal, in my experience. But lost dogs is mostly where people really want to say, can you just tell them to come home? We love them. So helping people understand is a big part of, I in all my work is coaching people to talk to your dog, tune in, get clear on the different ways I help them do that.
Right. And I've got another question for you, Liz. You've worked with rescues and shelters. How does the animal communication help with all of that?
Oh gosh, it helps with, so with the rescue, it helps definitely with placement and matching people with the right dog. Because many people will see a picture of a dog and say, oh, that's the one. It reminds me of Charlie, who I used to have. I want that dog. And we're like, oh my gosh, this dog, needs a lot of training or jumps a lot. And you've got 2 kids that are like 2 and 3. This is probably not a match for you right now. What about this dog? Helping people know. And that's not even, when people want a certain dog, we want to respect what the dog is sharing that they want. I had a dog that I was evaluating and meeting, and he jumped up and I got a bloody nose, a very bad bloody nose, because he really hit my nose. And the woman who was relinquishing the dog was like, I'm so sorry. And he was living in a small apartment. I go, oh no. And I could see him doing like agility, running and moving. And I was like, he wants to do that. And then he wanted to show me the backyard. And I followed him out and he was happy. And so in my report, I said, he wants action. He wants a partner who knows how to integrate his activity into life. And that dog became a national dock diving champion. So that's how it makes a difference. And it was great, not just for the dog, but the joy in the relationship the person was having.
Fantastic. That's great. Can you speak of the value of really having some years of experience as an animal communicator rather than saying you're a professional animal communicator only after, a weekend seminar or something like that? How does experience fit into all this?
So I think experience, saying for anyone, I'm a professional animal communicator. And like I've been doing this for many, many years. I think it's important when people are making decisions about surgeries, medical care, what's right for their family, that we can really cater to that particular need. And I have a student now that I'm training, and she had a practice session, a very significant one, and she called because the family's making decisions. And it's when it comes into decisions, it's fun to say, oh, your dog's personality is this, and it's a great stepping stone. But when people are hiring someone because they're making major decisions about their dog's care, they're working with a team about euthanasia, I think having somebody who's a professional and experienced, like, it makes a difference into the well-being of the client. My number one job is to advocate for the dog, and to then turn that over to the person, and that they leave feeling empowered to make the choice that's right for them. They're not accountable to me. I've got somebody who's considering retiring an animal that only wants a break. It doesn't want to be retired. It wants a break to heal for a couple months. It showed us very specifics. So a professional is experienced enough to know when to say, I think you need to go to a vet now versus wait. Because sometimes I'll tell people, I want you to watch this and keep notes for your vet when you go. I know to say, take a stool sample. Your vet's going to want a stool sample. Knowing how to really help people use the messages in a variety of situations, and to trust their own knowing, because we don't want liability. That's not what this is for. I don't know what's best. I used to teach kids, and it's not up to me to tell a child what to do if there's a fire in the house, and I've never been to their house. There are certain things that professionals cannot tell people in their home life. And so I think the professional experience helps to know how to deliver the message, discern the messages, to get the right words. I saw a shoe. It was the shape of a shoe, and it was meaningless to the woman. There was an audience. It was an online group. She's like, no, no, no. And I'm like, oh, I see a shoe. So she said, could it be a slipper? And I said, yeah, sure. It's by the bed. I hadn't said the bed, but I was like, oh yeah. She went crazy. That was the question she hadn't asked me, that was tied to the slipper, that was hugely important to her, because it was about a dog that had messages for her that had passed away. But she didn't connect it. So the experience to be able to say, ooh, I need to be more specific. I need to make sure, like I do on mine live, because I want people to be able to ask me questions, so that if somebody says, well, I don't know what that means, that they can tell me right then, so that they know. They don't have to book another appointment and wait 6 months or whatever and pay me more. I want them to know now what it is for the current situation. So I think a professional has experience of what works best for me and how I work, and what is the best client situation for the clients that I have, based on my experience practicing with people, getting feedback, what they like, what they need. So how I can make it a good experience. So I think that I don't see how it's possible to be certified after a weekend class or a week class or a month class. I don't. And my students would say the same thing. How could you possibly do that when someone's asking you about their dog? That's a major decision. I don't know. I think it's amazing. And I will add that intuition, is not right all the time. And business people will say that, but the people who've trusted their gut and made a business decision and were right, they invariably also had business experience in that field where they trusted their gut. And so that's why I think my match with dogs is good, because I have a student who's working with horses, and I can say, oh, something's wrong with that leg. Do you see it? And she'll get so much more specific information so much faster, because she's a professional horse person. And so if someone has a champion racehorse, I would recommend, she's a student, I'll work with her. I've brought her on to calls with horses with me, but I wouldn't say I'm a professional with a champion racehorse by myself, that I can give them some level of detail that will help. But if they want more, I would bring her on, because we've got even more experience to support the animal communication part.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so on that note, Liz, for people who are listening and for people who are like feeling inspired and they want to start tuning into their own animals, or, clients you've worked with before who you can support in like, getting them started and helping them feel empowered to tune into their own intuition then in a way that, they can as a beginner. Do you have any simple tips for people to start tuning into their own dogs and their own animals?
Yes. So being really open to it is perfect. And some people, have a harder time with their own dog. So that I say practice with a friend's dog who you like, the friend you feel safe with. You don't want someone who's cynical, like, oh, why are you wasting your time on that? If you're going to practice with someone else's dog, practice with someone who's very safe and encouraging of you as a beginner. If you're practicing with your own dog, it's getting into that calm space. And, there's a lot we talk about grounding and centering. Figure out where someone who wants to try this or who's doing this and wants to get better, how do you do it? I've got one of my students does it in her car, and she just figured out that works for her. There's a specific way she does it in her car, and she has to get aligned with the cell phone, but she's really good in her car. We tried it in another location. It was a disaster. In her car, it's like,
wow.
Yes. I have another one who had her office all set up. I'm going to do it at my desk. It was fine for classes with me. We one-on-one. She does it in her bed. So find your space where you're relaxed and you're free. That's number one, I think, as someone's new, where the location, because we get distracted. So number 2 tip for someone getting started would be just observe. And I write down, I make everyone who works with me write it down, because it's almost like automatic writing. You can look up automatic writing, because in my sessions, if I say, oh, the dog will come up and go, oh, your paw hurts. Okay, we're going to get to your paw later, but I want to know your favorite things, we'll say. So I write it down, because when you write it down, you're just observing, like the umbrella example, the dog. Then you can go back when you're finishing up time. You're like, oh, I mentioned the umbrella and now I see why. And you can see your progress. I did a talking with the dog's journal, if anyone wants, or you just get a notebook. And when you write it down, you can refer to it. You can see your progress. If you talk to Fido on Monday, and Fido, the only thing you got was the bicycle on the grass, for instance. And then you go Tuesday, he's like, oh, he keeps talking about the backyard. You start to see patterns, and invariably things that don't make sense at the beginning when you write it down, by the end of your time, it's typically linked to something that they said at the beginning. It links. I mean, we had that, I think, at Vantica, where we're like, oh, wow, this is interesting. This was said here, but now we see a bigger reason. Mm-hmm. So observe and just write it down. Those are the top 2.
And do you think, Liz, like, there's something to be said about expectations and maybe like wanting validation as someone who's just starting, because I know when I was starting to learn, that was something I had to really keep, a check on, is like, what are my expectations going into this? Am I seeking validation from my animal that this is working? And I know a lot of people say, not to have those expectations and not to worry about the validation, because that takes away from maybe the authenticity or the, your ability to tune in without having that kind of pressure.
So I think it depends. I get a lot of depends, I know, but I think it depends, because if I think we need validation to know that we're on the right track. And, I've seen people talk about, oh, I want to be more confident. Well, like I can be really confident, but if it's meaningless to the person that I'm telling, if I'm telling a person your dog says this shoe's important, and I'm super confident, but it's meaningless to the dog's person, then I'm not helping, and we're not sharing the message. So I think that verification is important. If I tell you, that your dog wants a car ride, for instance. We talked about that. Your dog really prefers the car ride, and I tell you why, and you validate it, then you're going to trust the process. And there's a difference between validation that something was accurate for the dog and we made this adjustment, we did something and it was good, is different than I want to be accurate now, but I'm not going to care, because sometimes things just don't make sense. So it's okay not to know. Like if I say I see this turkey treat that your dog wants, and you're like, no, never had turkey. I'm like, okay. But I'll say, I want you to consider that. I had a client, I said, something's off with your dog's hip. She goes, nope, my dog runs. Nope, nope, nope. I'm like, okay, well, just observe it, because I'm feeling something. I sort of see, I can't diagnose. I see something doesn't feel the same on one side versus the other. I want you to keep an eye on it. She goes, okay, but he's fine. Keep an eye. Will you keep an eye on it? Yes. Writes me back, signs up to study with me. You're not going to believe this. The dog suddenly wasn't getting up. We went to the vet. The dog has early stage hip dysplasia. It's so good that we're treating it now because it won't be worse. I would not have taken the dog to the vet if you hadn't asked me to keep an eye on it. So it's okay when I agree, when people can't verify, but at least tie it to asking them to keep an eye on it, or us keeping an eye on it, and remember it, because that's the flip side of maybe they are not seeing it yet. They're not ready. I had another client who I said, your dog loves this toy. It's yellow. And she's like, no, we don't have any yellow toys, but this is fun. I love talking with you anyway. And I'm like, okay. So she calls me the next day. I just wanted to tell you that his brown toy that he loves is old and dirty and faded. And it used to be pink yellow when we first got it.
Yeah. I guess the important thing for beginners might be to, that consistency. And like you said, you start on Monday, you go back and you continue the conversation on Tuesday or on Friday. And, I guess my question was like, people who are wanting to like, right now, I'm going to tune into my dog. If I don't receive anything, it's like, oh, I didn't get anything. But to really be patient with the process of starting to tune in and doing it consistently.
Yeah. And asking more. So say you get the ball. Oh, he likes the ball. I taught a guy who was in a class because his girlfriend made him go. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just see what you get. So he does it, and he's like sitting there, and I watched, he wrote down one thing. He got a ball. And so anyone who wants to try this, if you get one thing, I want you to go back to the dog and say, why is this important? Or what else can you show me or tell me? A person can try a different sense. If they're trying to see something and that's all I see is the ball, it's like, okay, fine. I want you to try touch. What does it feel like? How does the dog feel? Oh, it's too big in his mouth. Oh, his jaw hurts. Or ask him to, ask the dog to tell you more. That's a good tip.
Mm-hmm. Asking better questions, asking more questions to get more information.
And using different senses.
Right. So. Right. Any like we've talked about so many things today, Liz, anything you want to share with our audience, final messages, things that you want people to know about animal communication or about your process, your experiences?
So what I want people to know who are trying this, whether you're want to grow your animal communication practice with clients, or, I know a woman who's an animal communicator who focuses on working with rescues. So there's so many ways to do it. Or if you're just getting started, no matter what, is, know your why and know what brings you joy with it. And every time I've ever doubted, especially in the beginning, when I was balancing the fun part of talking with dogs with the business side and website, and you're supposed to do this and taxes, is I've always sat and thought, okay, if I'm supposed to do this, I want to know that I'm supposed to do this, hearing from myself. And I always got that. And I encourage people, if you want to do this, keep as much as you want to communicate with the animal, communicate with yourself. What is it that you want? If you find that you like the meditation part and you'd rather go there, do that. The chakra, there's so many aspects. Just like you go deep with the animals, go deep with yourself and follow where you're being led. Even if you think it sounds weird, because I had to tell everyone I'm a professional animal communicator, and some people, my dad was like, that sounds perfect for you. That makes total sense. I was like, oh, really? He goes, yeah, you're great with dogs. I'm like, okay, who knew? But just because he's 90 and he was from corporate. And so keep asking stick with where you're feeling called, wherever you are with this.
I love that. Thank you. Because I guess the important thing is, this is a process of not just getting to know our animals better, but I think in doing that, we get to know ourselves better. This is an opportunity for us to tune into ourselves and learn more about ourselves. So I love that. Thank you. And we're so excited because the next episode that we're going to share with people has excerpts from the conversation that you had, Liz, with my animals a few months ago with Simba, Maui, and Fiona. And this was at an important time for us. So I reached out because we were making decisions, or actually more than decisions, there was just a lot happening. There was a lot of transition. I was going to be away for a few weeks, then we were going to move across the country. And, if there's anything I've learned in this whole process, as I've learned more about animal communication, is that they appreciate being part of the decision-making process. They have opinions, they have needs, they have desires. And I feel now that it's my responsibility to create space for them to share those things with me. So I'm really excited for people to hear that. Barbara has heard that conversation. Actually, we had 2 conversations and we got such specific information from you. And it was just so much fun to hear what they were saying. And the best part was when you were talking about their personalities, it was like, you hit the nail on the head. Exactly what their personalities are like and what the dynamics are like between them. So I'm really excited about that episode to air so people can hear what an actual animal communication session is like with you. Liz, can you tell people where they can find you if they're interested in learning more about you and your work?
Sure. So my website is talkingwiththedogs.com. And I get a lot of people who like to go to Instagram at Talking with the Dogs as well and sort of go through there. Either way, I answer my own DMs, so people can reach out either way. And I encourage you to go deeper, whether it's with me or however, because it is possible. So thank you both. And I'm glad it made a difference, Avantika, and that you're continuing to share this. And Barbara, oh my gosh, we so need you, not just as another animal communicator, but a vet supporting this work. So thank you both.
Thank you. I'm just so blown away by you, Liz. And oh my gosh, this has been such a fascinating, incredible conversation. And I'm deeply, deeply impressed by the work you do. And like you said, the specificity and the detail and all of that. I wish when I were starting this, you would have been there and I could have taken a class with you. It's so amazing.
Well, you still can. The thing is like I've got these students, and I was on the phone with one last night in another coaching thing, and I was shocked at she and I would say, okay, well, ask this animal again what it has to say. And she would say the exact same words that I had written down. And this happened over and over. Wow. And I really believe it's because she has taken it seriously. This is the person who does it in the car. And when you follow those first 2 steps, know whatever stage you are. I know, Barbara, you say, oh, I'm further along. If you revisit, where's your ideal place to do animal communication? And we all get so focused on ourselves first, knowing what we want, what aspect. It's like, no, I know somebody who wanted to work with tigers only. And it's like, when you align with what's right for yourself, that's when the magic, I believe, happens. Because I see my students getting that same specificity when they do it. I don't want to say right, when they do it, what's right for them.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you saying that, because for me personally, I spoke with dogs and cats and horses for years, but always my deepest passion was with the wild animals. And over the years, I started, my work is through writing, like you say, automatic writing. It's almost like that. And I just became more and more interested and passionate about messages from the wild animals, not just individuals, but whole species. So that's where my focus has been for some time. And I never could have imagined that in the beginning. But it's like you say, you have to find your own personal calling. And there's so many aspects to animal communication and so many applications that I really appreciate your talking about that, and how critically important it is to tune into ourselves and
Yes.
trust what we receive, get to know who we are at a deeper level, and then just go with it. So I really appreciate that from you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
Liz, I've been taking notes as we've been talking, and I'm walking away from this conversation thinking about three things. First thing is seeing an animal communicator as an ally in the decision-making process, which I think everyone can benefit from. It's a win-win all around. The second thing, you said this, you used the word partner when you were talking about the rescue organization, the evaluation you did, that it really is a partnership, between the animal and or the dog and the human, and to see it that way is actually really nice, because we are in this together and we can work together as partners and both learn from it. I love that. And the last thing is, I think it's also important to recognize that if we're going to ask the animals what their needs are, what their desires are, then it's also important to honor them and to take the time to really, if it requires effort from our side, whatever it might be, that if we're going to ask them, then we have to respect what they need and honor those needs. So we've talked about so many different things. I hope people have taken, some of it has resonated with them. They've taken bits and pieces away that they can think about or they can apply in their own lives.
This was so good. Thank you, Liz.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love the community with you both and your passion and commitment to this, because we really need it. And as I shared the other day, I want animal communication to be, like many people do, mainstream. But since we're new as a sort of industry or whatever it is, that people get turned off by a bad experience. And so that's why it makes it all the more important, like your podcast, to keep sharing so that people understand it better and get ready to invite it into their lives. So thank you.
One of the things with this podcast, first of all, really, like, it's important for us to have the community and just to have these conversations and a space to do it. But I think also, like, we're trying to show different facets of this and different elements and different, like, people who communicate with different species or in different ways, or who apply, what they've learned and in different ways. And so it's really just, like, embracing all of it and recognizing that, like you said, when we really tune into what's right for us, like, we can do amazing things and we can contribute and really provide service to each other and, of course, to the animals. And that's really the most important thing. Thank you so much, Liz. It was so fun chatting with you. And before we wrap up this episode, we would like to end with the blessing for the animals.
We'd like to end this podcast by taking just a moment to be quiet. And we give thanks and blessings to these amazing animals that we share our lives with. They give us so much and ask for so little in return. We hope that you can keep the animals and all living beings in your heart and in your mind as you go about your day. Thank you so much for being here with us today.